Theatre of Norfolk's presentation of Red Moon Rising in the East, written by Dwayne Yancey, who happens to be watching this evening. I am Bill Armstrong. I will be performing the role of Sergei Pavlovich Korolev. And my cohort in crime here this evening is John Roberts, who will be doing all the sound cues, all three of them. Oh, their tech support, yes. He has made it a well-lit production this evening. All righty, it is now 7:09 p.m. I don't see anyone else coming in. Nina, if anyone else comes in, could you please allow them in? I would greatly appreciate it. And I am going to go off stage for a moment. Und I will be back, ja. Enjoy the production.
David, David, Bosiem, Siem, Shest, Piat, Chatili, Tri, Dva, Adin, Otrevatsja Otsimli.
My name is Sergei Pavlovich Korolev. I'm certain you have never heard of me. For much of my career, my very name has been a state secret. To protect me against you Americans, of course, in case you tried to come kill me. But that's all right. You've shown up here somehow, so I will tell you about me. Your government probably knows it all already anyway. I am known in the Soviet press only as the chief designer. But you know my work, whether you realize it or not. I am the one responsible for your space race. I launched the first Sputnik. I launched the first satellite to the moon. I'm the first to land a spacecraft on the moon, the first to photograph the far side, the first to Venus. And if you will all bear with me, I am going to restart because, like a dumb idiot, I forgot to start the recording. Kick it.
David, David, Bosiem, Siem, Shest, Piat, Chatili, Tri, Dva, Adin, Otrevatsja Otsimli.
My name is Sergei Pavlovich Korolev. I am certain that you have never heard of me. For much of my career, my very name has been a state secret. To protect me against you Americans, of course, in case you tried to come kill me. But that's all right. You've shown up here somehow, so I will tell you all about it. Your government probably knows it all anyway. I am known in the Soviet press only as the chief designer, but you know my work, whether you realize it or not. I am the one responsible for your space race. I launched the first Sputnik. I launched the first satellite to the moon, the first to land a spacecraft on the moon, the first to photograph the far side, the first to Venus. I put the first animal in space, a dog. Poor thing, she died. Of course. We had no way to bring her home. I put the first man in space. I put the first woman in space. I put 3 men into orbit before you could even put 2. I was dreaming of ways to get to Mars when your rockets were still blowing up on the launch pad. Whatever it is in space these days, I was the first to do it. At the Baikonur Cosmodrome, at our Cape Canaveral, if you must, there is a historical marker that reads, "Here, the genius of the Soviet people began the bold assault on the cosmos." I am that genius. And despite what you may have read in your Western papers, I have done it despite my government, not because of it. You want to know the truth? I shall tell you the truth. My ministers don't care about the moon or Mars or mankind's place in the cosmos. They care only about missiles. Missiles, missiles, and more missiles. To protect us against you crafty imperialist Americans. If I managed to piggyback a few space launches onto the missile test, well, what was the harm in that? It might even have some, how do we say, a propaganda value. This is my story. It's your story too, though you may not know it. It's elementary physics, one of Newton's 3 great laws. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Actually, Newton did not discover the law of gravity. A Russian did. Did you know this? His joke, laugh. But now I shall be serious, very serious. Let me make sure no one is listening. They're always listening, even on me. Maybe especially on me. Let me let you in on a little secret. No, a big secret. Something we can tell no one, especially you Americans. Your American space program, this action-reaction business in space, ever since the 1950s, all through the present decade, I am the action. Your American space program is the reaction. And I must say, for a long time, it hasn't been very equal. Yes, you may be catching up now. I've seen this Gemini program you have. I've heard of this Apollo program you have in the works. Your President Kennedy, God rest his soul, said he wanted to put a man on the moon. So be it. I said it first. It's true. From the time I was a child, I looked at the moon rising in the east and wondered what it would take to touch it. Even in my darkest days in the Gulag, I thought of the moon. And why shouldn't I have? It was always hanging there in the sky, taunting me. Oh, you didn't know? Yes, I was in the Gulag. Don't look so surprised. In those days, almost everyone was in the Gulag. I shall tell you later. Come, I don't know how you got in. Maybe you bribed the guards. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. But now that you're here, why don't you join me for dinner? I always have dinner here at my desk, after everyone else leaves for the night. Black bread, sausage, tea with lemon. Would you care for some? I have plenty to spare. I'm on first-class rations here. Now, don't hold out for vodka. I try not to touch this stuff. I'm not like a lot of people in my country. I like a clear head when I work. I'm not like a lot of people in my country in another way. I like to work. The nighttime is my second shift. This is when I get most of my work done. All day long, and meetings and more meetings, paperwork to get through, state commissions to satisfy, more state commissions. We're supposed to be revolutionaries. And you know what we've become? A nation of bureaucrats. A nation of paper shuffling, butt covering bureaucrats. Oh, don't tell anyone I said that. Ah, what the hell. I'm sure it's on my file already. Ah, well. Apple trees and pear trees were a flower. Mist was rising over the river. Katyusha went out to the banks to the high and steep river banks. What? You don't know it? It's Katyusha. It's an old Russian folk song. Here, let me teach you another one. The Volga Boatman. Everybody knows the Volga Boatman. All together, all together. But that's part of the song. Sing it with me now. All together, once again, one more time. That's part of the song too. You can sing it along, yes. All together, once again, one more time. Let's tow till the birchen cudgel bends. Let's bend the cudgel of the curly birch tree. Ida, 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 Ida. Let's bend the cudgel of the curly birch tree. And now again, imagine everyone working together to pull the barge upstream. All together, once again, one more time. It's a very important song, you know. Lots of Russian history here. We are walking along the river banks, singing our song for the dear sun. Ida, 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 Ida. We're singing our song for the dear sun. All together, once again, one more time. That's it. Oh, you Volga mother stream, you are so wide and deep. Ida, 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 Ida. You are so wide and deep. One more time. All together, once again, one more time. Oh, well, that was spirited. Do you know the story? It is a sad story. Most Russian stories are, I'm afraid. Nothing like some good black Russian tea. Much better. That'll keep me going for several hours yet. Strong as one of those Volga boatmen. At nighttime. That's when I really begin to see where we fit into the great scheme of things, don't you think? No, I don't mean the historical dialectic. I mean space. You see out the window? The moon's out tonight. It's looking very red tonight. A good omen, don't you think? A red moon. The state commissions in Moscow would like that, don't you think? Yes, tractor production in the Ukraine. Yes, that's important too, I suppose. But the hammer and sickle planted up there on the moon, well, that would be something for the history books. And we shall do it too. I believe this. Oh, our general secretary does not speak about it the way your presidents do. Certainly not our new one, this Brezhnev fellow. Is no matter. I speak of it. And I am the one that will make it happen, if they will let me. Oh, here, let me show you the new model. Now, you can't tell anyone this. No. Oh, I'm sure your government knows. I mean, my government. Anyway. This is our moon rocket. This is our N1. Well, I'd better just say this is our rocket. Some people in Moscow think it's a waste of money if we wanted just to go to the moon. Missiles aimed at the Americans. That's all they care about sometimes. Oh, don't look so surprised. I know that's already in my file. I've told them enough times. It certainly ought to be there. I'd be disappointed if it wasn't. You want to know something? I didn't originally design the N1 to go to the moon. You know what I designed it for? To go to Mars. I'm merely being patriotic. They don't call it the Red Planet for nothing. Anyway, whatever it's for, this is our rocket, our N1. Do you see this? There are 30 engines in the first stage alone. 30! You Americans will only have 5 on your Saturn V. Well, yes, yours are bigger, and so you don't need as many. But 30 engines. Imagine the thrust we can get with that. Enough to break the one law in the universe that really matters. The law of gravity. If only I can get the rubles to test them properly. That's what we're going to need if we want to get to the moon before you Americans. The rubles for testing. You can't just go firing these things off without proper testing. But no, testing's a waste of money. We could build more missiles instead, or more tractor factories in the Ukraine. That's where our precious rubles are going. Into tractors and tanks. And oh, speaking of rubles, pardon me a moment. Ivan, I've got something for you. Ivan, I'm glad you were here. You put in some long hours helping to figure out that guidance program. Well, thank you, Ivan. Here, consider this a bonus, Ivan. Oh, don't worry, go ahead and take it. Nobody will know. I'll say this about Moscow. They may not give me all the rubles that I want, but they don't ask questions about how I spend what they do give me. Not as long as I get the results. And you've helped produce results, Ivan. Besides, I put you in for a medal, too. Now, that'll take longer. Lots of paperwork involved in that, comrade. It'll be one of the good ones, I'm sure. Order of Lenin, Hero of the Soviet Union, something like that. Now go home, Ivan. Your wife misses you, I'm sure. Morning will come before you know it. Now go! Sometimes a little capitalist motivation helps. Oh, that thing about medals? I don't care much for medals myself. Hell, they won't even let me use my own name in Pravda. It was Khrushchev's idea. So what good are medals if I can't wear them? I'd rather have the rubles. Oh, not for me, for the testing. I think I'll have some more tea. Why don't you stay a while and we'll talk? There's not much to be done tonight anyway. It all depends on whether I can persuade Moscow to give us the rubles anyway. Well, let me tell you how I first got interested in aeronautics. Oh, this is quite a story. When I was 6 years old, it was announced that a wonderful new invention was going to be demonstrated at my little village in the Ukraine. Do you know what that invention was? It was an aeroplane. My grandfather took me out to see it. This was 1913, just 10 years after your Wright brothers. No one in our village had even seen an airplane before that. We went out to the fairgrounds. There were so many people that the army had to be called out to keep order. The army. That's how crazy it was. I had to sit on my grandfather's shoulders to see anything. But, oh, I could see it all from up there. The soldiers pushed the airplane out into the middle of the field. And then they cranked the propeller up, and it started spinning round and round. Oh, the crowd thought this was marvelous. Clouds of dust rose up into the air. For half an hour, the plane sat there, just spinning its propeller, warming up. And then the pilot came out. Sergei Tochkin was his name. He was a famous barnstormer in those days. He waved to the crowd. Oh, what a sight that was. People went wild. It was like watching a daredevil at the circus. Half of them thought he was a lunatic. The other half didn't know what to think. So the pilot got into the plane, and the soldiers grabbed hold of each wing, and the plane started rolling across the field. slowly at first, but then faster and faster and faster, until finally the plane was off the ground. It bounced a few times, boom, boom, like that. But then it bounced up and it didn't come back down. It was in the air and he flew. He flew. He didn't fly far, just over some fields before he finally came down. But he flew, no doubt about that. The crowd pushed past the soldiers and went rushing after him like some kind of crazy mob. Everyone was amazed. The machine really flew. It was like magic, this machine flying through the air like a bird. I'm sure it is the most wonderful thing ever to happen in my little village of Nezet. From that day forward, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to fly as well. I wanted to fly higher and further than anyone else would dare. And do you know what all the little boys in my village did that night? They went home and dreamed that someday they would be pilots too. But there was one difference between me and them. Do you know what that difference was? I went home and studied my mathematics. You see, they were fascinated by the pilot. To me, the hero was the man who built the machine that made it possible for the pilot to fly. Besides, I love mathematics. I could count to 1,000,000 by the time I was in school. That is the difference between dreaming and engineering, my friends. Dreaming is, well, dreaming. Engineering is doing. The moon may be a dream for some, but for an engineer, it will be an objective, and I am an engineer. And that's why they eventually sent me to the Gulag. This was when I was already out of school and working for the Aeronautics Institute in Moscow. I was accused of subversion. Subversion in a new field of technology, they called it. Oh, I was subversive, all right. I wanted to work on liquid-fueled rockets. The program at the time called for work on solid fuels, but the program was wrong. There was more future in liquid fuels, more thrust, more control, more everything. I guess the state doesn't like when people go experimenting with powerful explosives without permission. They were fools, of course. They thought I wanted to plot against the authority of man. As if I cared who was sat in the Kremlin. I was plotting against something far more sinister. I was plotting ways to rebel against the authority of nature. Try explaining that to the KGB, though. It's just the way things were in those days. But I didn't commit any crime. That's what I said at my trial. I didn't commit any crime. And you know what they told me? None of you swine has committed a crime. 10 years, hard labor. Go, next. Like I said, that's just the way things were in those days. Oh, I wrote letters, all right. To the courts, to Stalin himself. No use. By the fall of '39, there I was in Kolmia in Siberia. It was terrible, awful. The beatings, the starvation. I lost all my teeth. They just fell out. My jaw, it got broken. Nearly died there, you know. Many others actually did. Many others. No more. I don't wish to discuss it anymore. Those were different days. I was only there a year, but it felt like a lifetime. Several lifetimes, in fact. Oh, no, I wasn't released. I was transferred to a sharaga. You know what the sharaga is. Sharaga, Sharaska. It was like a factory inside the prison. It was Tupolov's doing, of course. Surely you know of Tupolov. Andrei Tupolov, the airplane designer? A great man. He had been one of my teachers. Now he wanted me to be one of his designers. Oh, yes. He was in the Sharaska too. I told you. That's just the way things work. Best not to ask, you see. Eventually, I became a chief designer for my group, group number 5. We worked on jet engines for dive bombers during the Great Patriotic War, what you Americans call World War II. And you know what else we worked on? Rocket engines. You know what type of fuel we used for them? Liquid fuel. I suppose by then it wasn't considered subversive technology, eh? It must have even been patriotic, because not only did they let me go, they made me a full colonel in the Red Army, just like that. Well, the war was over by then anyway, of course. But they wanted me to look at the Germans' missiles. Of course, Werner von Braun and all of his top people had gotten off to the American side. We just had the technicians. Our people would interrogate those poor puppies all day long. I don't know who to feel sorrier for, the Germans or our stenographers. Imagine one of our generals. Are you getting all of that down? I don't know what he's talking about, sir. You don't need to know what he's talking about. Just copy it down. Yes, sir. Resume the interrogation. Our generals had no idea what they were doing, what they were looking at. That was my job, to help them figure out just what they had, what the Germans had been up to. Colonel Korolev, do you understand what the prisoner is saying? He's saying that the flight path of the missile is a function of both the thrust and guidance. The more thrust, the further the missile will go. But the greater the possibility that a small error in guidance will send the missile many kilometers off course. So the two must work hand in hand. This seemed to impress our prisoner. That is correct, Herr Colonel. You have a good grasp of the principle. Oh, that was the worst insult of all. To be told by the Germans you have a good grasp of the principle? Of course I have a good grasp of the principle. I was building liquid-fueled rockets before you Germans even thought about using them to make war on your neighbors. I was dreaming of launching rockets to the moon before you could ever realize that you could fire one across the English Channel. I did not come here on a turnip wagon. But please, continue. It's true. All the Germans had done was to do what we could have done. Our generals had difficulty comprehending even the elementary principles, much less the possibilities. They saw rockets as just a glorified form of artillery, not a whole new means of transportation. They'd come up to me and ask things like, how much range do you think is possible with this missile? Of course, I had to tell them. Oh, the range is unlimited. Increase thrust enough, and you could launch an artificial satellite into orbit around the Earth. Our Soviet generals thought this was stuff from science fiction. Our German friend, however, understood. This is true, Herr General. It is theoretically possible to reach such a velocity to escape the Earth's gravity. Quit talking nonsense, or we shall beat some sense into you. Colonel, resume the interrogation. It's only a matter of engineering, I told them. These German missiles, they had the thrust to reach London. Increase the thrust some more, and you could increase the range to hit the United States. Our generals liked that idea. Increase the thrust some more beyond that, and you could increase the range so much you'd never come back down. You'd overshoot the whole planet and put a rocket into orbit around the Earth. I liked that idea. Our generals did not. But what would be the point of that, comrade? Then increase the velocity by yet another 40%, and we can visit the moon. We should work together to achieve this, like the Volga boatmen. Should I write that down here, Comrade General? Our generals have so little imagination. Aventura, crazy dreams. We have no interest in such fantasies. We are here to learn about rockets, not outer space. Back to the interrogation, Colonel Korolev. Back to the interrogation. Do you know what I was thinking? Here's what I was thinking. Wasted. All those years wasted. Think of where we Russians might have been if they hadn't carted us all off to the Gulag for all of those years. We would have been the ones building rockets in the 1940s. I'm certain of it, certain. Instead, here we were, forced to take lessons from our German prisoners like mere schoolboys. It leaves a bitter taste in the mouth, like bad vodka. And they wonder why I have such a bad temper. There were many bitter tastes in those days, I'm afraid. My wife divorced me, or maybe I divorced her. It's hard to say. We'd been apart for so long. When I came back from the Sharaga, I had my work. She has hers. She was a doctor. She was away a lot. And so was I, trying to get our missile program off the ground, literally. And I'll admit there were other women too. Can you blame me? I was under a lot of pressure. But let's not talk about that. Let's talk about what really matters. I'll give Stalin credit for this much. I don't think he had anything to do with me being sent to the Gulag. It was just the nature of things. Best not to think too much about it. But Stalin had everything to do with getting a missile program started after the war. He saw right away what was at stake: the security of the fatherland. Stalin wanted missiles? Well, by God, we'll build missiles then. He wanted missiles powerful enough to reach North America? I wanted missiles powerful enough to reach the moon. Are they so different? We spent years trying to copy what the Germans had done. I begged for permission to build our own rocket. I knew we could. It was just a matter of getting the permission. But no, Stalin wanted to make sure we could copy the Germans first. I don't think he had much confidence in us. He was like that sometimes. But I had confidence. One day I went up to one of the young fellows in our design bureau. Oleg. I think his name was Oleg. Oleg Petrovich, a word, please. Oleg? Yes, sir. No one ever wants the boss to come over and ask for a word, please. It's never just a word, is it? I have a special request for you, Oleg. Yes, sir. What is it? Now he's feeling a little bit relieved, because he thinks he's out of whatever trouble he thought he was in. The rocket design you are working on, there's something I'd like you to add. Yes, sir. A pilot's cabin. Oleg must have thought I'd lost my mind. Pilot's cabin, sir? Yes, just big enough for one pilot. But I don't understand. People like that always drive me crazy. What is there to understand? I want a pilot's cabin. But why do we need a pilot? These are rockets. There's no need for a pilot. The rockets fly themselves. Just humor me, little one. We might want a pilot someday. Design me a rocket with a pilot's cabin. Yes, sir. What else can he say? This is Russia. Do it well, and there'll be some extra rubles in your paycheck. Extra rubles always gets their attention. Yes, sir. And make sure it won't depressurize. All right. I'll admit it. I was thinking way far ahead, especially since we'd never even fired off a single rocket of our own. Just some we'd copied from the Germans. Still, someday you might need a pilot's cabin, right? Off you go now. Sure you don't want some tea? I'm going to have some more tea. So, where were we? Right. Yeah. The R series. The R1, the R2, and so forth. Just like the Germans V1 and V2, except for now we had worked our way up to the R7. This was 1953. I remember it exactly because 3 things happened that year that changed everything. Khrushchev took over. We all remember that. Stalin died. That's why Khrushchev took over. And third, well, I'll get to the third. Let me go on with the story. So, Khrushchev, he knew nothing about any of this. I guess Stalin hadn't told him. Stalin probably hadn't told anyone. He was like that. So I was called up to Moscow to brief our new leader on the whole rocket program. I explained all about the R-7, how if we built it, it could fly 7,000 kilometers, far enough to reach North America. You should have seen Khrushchev. He looked, well, he was dumbfounded. All of them in the Kremlin were dumbfounded. They were like sheep being shown a new gate for the first time. They had no idea about any of this. So of course they said yes. Build it fast. Build as many as you can. A missile that can hit America? Who wouldn't want to say yes to that? The fools. That's all they cared about. That and the bomb. Oh, yes, that's the other big thing that happened in '53, of course. We set off our own nuclear bomb. I'll never forget when they told me about the bomb. The generals, they thought they'd made a mistake somehow, a big mistake. You know how generals are, don't you? Korolev, come here, a word with you. Like I said, it's never just a word now, is it? You could tell they were very anxious about something. Your missile, Sergei Pavlovich, how much can it carry? We must know now. Now, from an engineering perspective, well, that's just an engineering issue. You need to carry more weight, you just add more thrust. So you just build a bigger rocket. That's all. But that's not quite what I said. How much do you need it to carry, Comrade General? Sakharov's bomb. They say it weighs 5 metric tons. Can you carry 5 metric tons? The generals still didn't have any grasp on the whole concept of this thrust and range. They just understood enough to know that weight mattered somehow. It's heavier than we thought. Is this a problem, Sergei Pavlovich? You knew they were really desperate when they called you by your patronymic. I did some rough calculations in my head, or at least I pretended to make them think that I had to think about it some. We'll have to scale up the R-7 to carry a payload that big. But that's not a problem. Of course not. You can scale up anything. It'll just need more thrust than before. By which I really meant, I'll need more rubles. But you know what the generals really wanted to know, of course. You can still make it reach America? I had to laugh. Give me enough rubles and I can scale it up enough so it can reach the moon. The generals had no interest in the moon. Ah, Korolev, you crazy dreamer. Just make it big enough to reach North America. Khrushchev will give you all the rubles you need for that. I should buy Sakharov a drink. His bomb was too heavy. So now they had to let me build a bigger rocket. And if it was going to be big enough to shoot 5 metric tons halfway around the world, well, who's to say it couldn't shoot something much lighter all the way into orbit? So, I wouldn't want you to think we'd let anything stand in the way of our important military priorities. And then if we were to add a second stage, we could go to the moon. Andrei Sakharov, this is for you. So that's how it all happened, really. I won't say I tricked them. Let's just say I gave them what they wanted and a little bit more that they didn't know they wanted. Do you know what their problem is? The generals and the politicians? They have no sense of adventure, no sense of history. But history is very important. Why? We Russians practically invented rockets. Oh, yes. I bet you didn't know that. I bet you don't even know who Kovalchuk was. Nikolai Kovalchuk. He was the first person to sketch out how you could use slow-burning explosives as a means of repulsion. This was decades before the Wright brothers and their puny propeller plane. Decades! And there were others, many others. Nezhedovsky, Lebedev, and Tsiolkovsky. What can I say about Tsiolkovsky? He figured out everything, everything. You can look it up. The same year your Wright brothers were still kicking the sand on the beach trying to get their invention into the air, Tsiolkovsky was figuring out the principles of space travel. Let the Americans with their coastlines sail the seas. It is the destiny that the Russians, we landlocked Russians, should sail the stars. Of course, all those men I mentioned, they did those things on their own. Then we had the revolution, and now look at us. Now we can't do anything unless it's in the 5-year plan. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. I am, after all, a member of the party now, a card-carrying communist. Not that it means anything. It's just the only way to get anything done. And what is an engineer who can't get anything done? A mere dreamer. God knows, left to their own devices, the generals and the politicians wouldn't do a thing. Oh, they'd want their missiles all right. But they're so busy looking down at their maps that they never take the time to look up at the stars. Does the general secretary even know where the moon is? I wonder. Well, I do. And I send it fraternal socialist greetings if I have to. Moscow. They never seemed to understand that this thing we call the space race had already begun. The Americans had all the top Germans. They had to be doing the same thing. You know, a fellow like Wernher von Braun was not going to be content just to fire off some test missiles in the desert. You had to know his eyes were really on the stars. But so were mine. So were mine. Even in the darkest days. It is in the darkest time of night when you see the stars best, they say. And we had some very dark days. You probably don't know about them. They weren't publicized, of course, all the failures we had back in the 50s. The generals came around to see me, more than just a word this time. Your missile seems to be having problems, comrade. It's never a good thing when generals talk about problems. There are some in Moscow who are beginning to wonder if this R-7 will ever fly. How many missiles have you had explode now, eh? 3? 4? Oh, now that really got me. Of course they explode. What do you expect them to do? We're building the most powerful machines in the world. What is a rocket launch but an explosion? A controlled explosion, comrade. A controlled explosion. You can't seem to control anything. Generals, they do not understand testing. Do you think von Braun had ever had to explain himself to the Americans like this? I told the generals, but we learned something from every single one of those explosions. All 5 of them. The generals, they didn't want tests. They wanted results. Finally, we got results. 21 August 1957, the R-7 flew for more than 6,000 kilometers from Central Asia all the way to Kamchatka. We'd done it. We finally had our first intercontinental ballistic missile. I got called before the generals to explain what it all meant. Now, the R-7 is equipped with 20 engines. It takes off with 1 million pounds of thrust, making it the most powerful missile we have constructed. This one general, with a chest full of medals, just couldn't contain himself any longer. So can we consider this missile operational then? It was the whole testing thing. I tried to explain it to them again. My version of operational. The next logical step with the R7, Comrade General, would be to reduce the size of the payload. By a certain reduction of the payload, it would be possible for the satellite payload to reach the necessary velocity of 8,000 miles per second. Oh, you'd have thought a fox had just turned up in a coop full of chickens. They all cackled at once. What do you mean by this word satellite? Why is 8,000 miles the necessary velocity? Will they still be able to reach America? Well, maybe I was a bit of a fox. I did try to answer them as best I could. I mean that with the thrust of the R7, we can use this missile to launch an artificial satellite into orbit around the Earth. Oh, that really set them off. Preposterous, ridiculous. Who ever heard of such a thing? A distraction. We have our priorities. What would be the point? The waste of money. Imagine the costs. We can't afford it. Too risky. What if something went wrong? Quite dangerous. So I had to beat them at their own game. I just turned the question around on them. Perhaps I should phrase the question differently. Should the USSR try to become the first country to launch a satellite, or would we rather let the Americans do that? Oh, that did it. The room fell silent. Nobody wants to let the Americans be first in anything. Finally, one of the generals ventured to say something. That's a somewhat different question now, isn't it, comrades? Very different indeed. I couldn't help but turn the screws on them a little bit. Perhaps this question should be put to the Central Committee in Moscow, or do you wish to reject the idea here? Well, that made it impossible for them to say no. Nobody wanted it on their record that they blocked a chance for a Soviet first. So naturally, they had to forward the recommendation to Moscow. Tell Moscow we are ready to carry out the party's wishes. And of course, the party had no idea what the generals were talking about, this business of artificial satellites. But if the generals thought it was a good idea and something they could do, who are the apartichiks in the Kremlin to say no? Especially if it meant beating you Americans. Nobody wanted it on their record either. So that's how we launched the Sputnik. I bet von Braun didn't have to play games like that. On the other hand, von Braun came in second, didn't he? The factory workers who built Sputnik had no idea what they were building. They just came in one day and all the walls are painted. Something the party ordered. Something I ordered. Just to show them how important this was. I practically lived at the factory while they were building Sputnik. I had them put it on a stand in the middle of the factory floor. I wanted everyone to see it. This thing, this satellite they were building, it was nothing more than a transmitter inside a ball, really. But it was going where no one had ever gone before. It was going into space. And I wanted them to have reverence for it. I even had velvet brought in for them to put it on. Do you know how hard velvet is to come by? But I got my hands on some velvet. That got the workers' attentions, especially the ladies. And there were lots of ladies in the factory. Of course, the dressing down I gave the plant's chief engineer, that got everyone's attention too. They say I am a hard taskmaster. Do you think I'm a hard taskmaster? You don't have to answer it. I understand. But I wanted things done just so. This was history we were making. History. And the engineer, he was demonstrating how the nose cone would jettison and the Sputnik would separate from the booster. He had a model he was using, and, well, I had to make a point. Is there something wrong, Comrade Korolev? Wrong? Wrong? How dare you ask me, is there something wrong? Are you too ignorant that you can't see for yourself what is wrong? Look at this satellite. Look at it. I said I wanted it polished, polished until it shines. But look at this. I've never seen such shoddy workmanship in my whole life. This will never do. Never, never. You must do better than this. Must I report you to the party? Is this simply incompetence or outright insubordination? Oh, that put the fear into him. He started sputtering something about, this was just a model, a mock-up. The real satellite is over there where I said to put it, in the middle of the factory floor. But now I was truly angry. I know it's a model, damn it! Of course it's a model. I didn't come here on a turnip wagon. But do you know why this model is so important? No. He really had no clue. No clue whatsoever. The poor bastard. So I had to tell him. Because once we launch our Sputnik into space, this is all we will have to show the world. This ball will be exhibited in museums. So I want it polished. Polished for posterity. It's true, you know. None of these people could think further than their own nose sometimes. I'm sorry, comrade, but I had no such orders. Well, you have them now. I want this model to shine. And you know what? It did. We were on a tight deadline. We knew the Americans were probably trying to do the same thing. I also wanted to get it done before the State Commission changed its mind. So there we were, at the Baikonur test site. There was no Cosmodrome then, just a test site. 4 October 1957. I'll never forget that day. There's smoke, there's fire, all 20 engines burning, 20. The rocket, she starts to rise. She clears the tower. The most beautiful sight you ever saw, just this slender flame arcing across the sky. And then she's gone. Our engineers track it down range until it goes out of range. Then there's nothing to do but wait. If it worked, if Sputnik had gone into orbit, it would take only an hour to circle the Earth and come back around for us to hear it. That must have been the longest hour of our lives. The generals, they still didn't understand. What if it doesn't work, Korolev? Where will your Sputnik come down? If it doesn't make orbit, it could come down anywhere. Anywhere? Anywhere. The forest of Siberia, the Pacific Ocean, the United States even. Suddenly, the generals were no longer that interested in a missile that could reach America. Good God, Korolev, you mean we've just launched a missile that might accidentally come down in the United States? What goes up must come down. It's all a matter of gravity, unless it goes into orbit. This was not the time for a physics lesson. Damn it, Korolev! If your silly satellite stunt winds up starting World War III, there'll be hell to pay. I promise you, hell to pay. As if there'd be any of us left. But that's how the generals were. How did the French say, c'est la vie? An hour passed. Now the room fell silent. All you could hear were people breathing and a static from the loudspeakers. And more static. And then, down in the white noise, we heard it. beep, beep. That was it. We could scarcely believe our ears. Then louder, beep, beep, beep. We did it! The whole room erupted. Cheers, hugs. I saw tears streaming down the faces of grown men, of engineers. Engineers don't cry, but engineers cried that day. I know, I did. I'd been waiting for this day all my life, all for that little beep, beep, beep. And they wanted me to give a speech, they cried. So I did. I am not a speech maker, but I gave one that day. Today, the dreams of the best sons of mankind have come true. The assault on space has begun. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, just thinking about that day still brings tears to my eyes. Perhaps I need some time to compose myself. Perhaps some tea. So where were we? Yes, Sputnik, that's right. The beep, beep, beep. I'm told the Americans heard the beep, beep, beep that day as well. In some ways, they heard it more clearly than we did. The Sputnik was front page news all over the world. I have some of them here. Here we go. Yes, the New York Times, the Manchester Guardian, Le Figaro in France. Here's one of the British papers. Let me read this for you. The Soviet achievement is immense. It demands a psychological adjustment on our part towards Soviet society, Soviet military capabilities, and perhaps most of all, to the relationship of the world with what is beyond. I liked that. I liked that a lot. I'll read that last part again. The relationship of the world with what is beyond. What is beyond? The general part will probably like the parts about their military capabilities, but I like what is beyond. And the French papers, they used words like humiliation. The French love to stick at the Americans, don't they? Sputnik was front page news on Pravda too, down in the corner, labeled TASS report. It didn't even rate a headline, just a roundup from the news agency. Here, I'll read that for you too. In the course of the last days of the Soviet Union, scientific research and experimental construction work on the creation of artificial satellites of the Earth has been going on. This is worse than some scientific report. They had no idea, did they? No idea at all. The Americans understood. The whole world understood. Moscow still didn't understand. We'd done this thing in the name of the Soviet people, and the Soviets were the last to appreciate it. Once the politicians in Moscow saw how shocked the rest of the world was, then they got excited. The next day, we got a banner headline in Pravda listing all the congratulations that were pouring in. Personally, I think Khrushchev was baffled by the whole thing. Who would have thought of it? We spent millions of rubles on our military forces, and it's some silly little scientific stunt that they're impressed by. Perhaps we should have spent more rubles on rockets, eh? But I'll say this about Khrushchev. I know we shouldn't speak his name, but I don't care. I'll say his name. Khrushchev may not have understood science or engineering or sometimes much of anything else, but he understood the value of propaganda, and we just handed him the best propaganda he could ever have dreamed of. Khrushchev called me up to Moscow for more briefings. I don't think I'd ever seen a man so happy. Do you know what he told me? We never thought you would launch a Sputnik before the Americans, but you did. Now please launch something new in space for the next anniversary of our revolution. Please launch something new? He was like a child asking for a birthday present. And for the next anniversary of our revolution? That was in a month. A month. Who would be so crazy to think we can launch something new in a month? Khrushchev didn't want just another simple sphere with a radio transmitter. He wanted something special, something that would outdo ourselves. Who was I to disagree? How else we were going to get to the moon unless we kept outdoing ourselves? Oh, that was a crazy time. There was no time for checking and rechecking. Everything was a first draft. The engineers would draw their plans, give them straight to the factory workers. We just hoped it would all work. And it did. With the next Sputnik, we even launched a dog into space. And this was Laika, of course, that I spoke of earlier. Poor thing. But it was a Soviet dog. The first living thing in space was a Soviet. That's what mattered to Khrushchev. Those were the days. After Sputnik, everything changed. Before, we were building missiles to attack the Americans. After we were still building missiles to attack the Americans. But now we were also building rockets to send into space. And there seemed no limit on how far we could go. At last, the moon seemed within our grasp. And now, sometimes I am not so certain. Our Khrushchev was retired, they say. His name was never spoken again. It's like he'd been airbrushed out of history. He was a pain in the posterior. That was for sure. But, I think I'll miss him. Brezhnev is mostly interested in, keeping things orderly. Khrushchev was a gambler. Be it in Berlin or in Cuba or in space. That's what finally brought him down. He took too many chances. Brezhnev, he doesn't want to take any chances. And that's a problem. If we're going to have to take a lot of chances if we want to get to the moon. Do you understand that? You Americans, you're testing every little thing, every step of the way. I can't afford it. I've got to hope it all works right when we put it together. Damn you Americans. Damn you all to hell. Oh, nothing personal, mind you, but look at where you put your space program. In Florida, on a beach, a resort. Look where we are. Kazakhstan. How do you Americans say the sticks? The only difference between this place and Siberia is that Siberia has better weather. I'm serious. This is like living in internal exile. I have highly trained engineers living in railway cars, barely able to eat 3 meals a day. We have no air conditioning, no refrigeration, no computers. I have people doing calculations by pen and paper. Computers are bourgeoisie, they say. Not that we can afford them anyway. Well, here's the science I understand. Each time we launch a rocket, we pay a weight penalty simply because we're Russians. I'll explain. The Baikonur Cosmodrome is 45 degrees north latitude. Your Cape Canaveral, Cape Kennedy now, is only 28 degrees north latitude. You see, the principle works like this. The closer you are to the equator, the faster the Earth rotates, so the less thrust you need to reach orbit. I won't bore you with the math, but here's how it works out. Even with the same size of rocket, you can launch more tons into space than we can simply because of where you are. So you see, you Americans have the Earth spinning in your favor too. Our best simply isn't enough. And do you know what I've heard lately? The electronics are going to kill us. Our electronics are too damned heavy. You're Americans. I hear you are able to miniaturize everything. Someday they'll be able to put them on little circuit boards no bigger than your thumb. But ours are so big and bulky, we're going to have to take 50 tons off our payload just to make room for them all. 50 tons! That means we can only launch 75 tons. We can't build a moon lander to 75 tons. It's impossible. We need 125 tons to make all the systems work. The engines, the guidance, the life support. But you know what? You Americans say with your new electronics, the Apollo kit will only weigh 100 tons. Yet we couldn't even launch that. What kind of crazy world do we live in where they can make things smaller and more powerful? All we can do is try to build them bigger, and the bigger they are, the harder they are to get off the ground. It makes no sense. Oh, don't mind me. It's late and I'm babbling, aren't I? Let's call it a night and go home. I've got some new ideas that I want to work on that might help us with the weight problem. I'll get to them when I get back from hospital. Oh, I haven't told you. I'm going in for surgery just after the New Year's holiday. Oh, nothing major, just routine. Once I get back, I'm going to go full bore on this moon mission. With luck, we might even circle the moon next year. Yes, in 66. I'll make them give me the rubles. And if not, well, we'll patch things together somehow. We can do it. I know we can. Just imagine that. The moon. That red moon. I think that's an omen, don't you? We will get there.
January 14th, 1966. Sergei Korolev died from complications during what should have been routine surgery. Some say his heart had been weakened during his years in the Gulag. Some say the operation had been botched by incompetent doctors. But this much is certain. The Soviet Union never again attempted to go to the moon.
Oh, thank
Well
you
done,
all
old
for
man.
joining us this evening. Wayne, would you like to unmute and come online and have a chat with us?
All right, I'm here.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me put my ears back on. Ah, I can hear you again. Oh. So how are you this evening, Dwayne?
I'm good. I'm good.
So whatever gave you the idea to do all this research and start this?
Well, I've been a space buff since I was a little kid. And fairly late in life, read about Korolev, of course, as you say, and yeah, his name was a state secret. And so I was just fascinated by this alternative universe behind the Soviet space program. And it seemed very dramatic and untold.
And you tell it well.
Well, you help.
Uh-huh. Let's see. I will take a look and see who we have out there and bring it up so I can see who's out there and see who. Oh, we have. Okay, Holly, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello. My son, actually.
Oh, cool.
Thing is, I've been very interested in the Soviet Union. I've studied the history, anything from like Lenin, the hero of the Soviet Union, to Stalin, the evil one who killed lots of people, and all the way to Khrushchev, Mikhail Gorbachev. So I was wondering also, who is your favorite dictator out of all the dictators? Like, was it Lenin or Khrushchev? Like, who was it? Who is it?
I'm pretty sure I've never been asked that question before. So I'm not sure I have a favorite dictator.
My favorite's Lenin. My least favorite is Stalin because he wasn't so good. Although I am Jewish and he did liberate my people from the concentration camps, but he wasn't really. He did have a lot of blood on his hands too. So
Anyone else have a question?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just wondering how historically accurate this is. It
Um,
was very interesting.
It's pretty much 100% historically accurate. I mean,
That's
there's
great.
of the facts he cited, none of those were made up. Those are all true facts.
So basically, your part was just putting it into him telling the story.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not a science buff, but I found it very interesting. I can remember our moon launch in '69, and that's what piqued my interest.
I would be more into science, except I'm not into math. So
That's me.
But I love mathematics.
good for you. Good for you.
I like English and history. I like the historical aspect of this too. So
If anyone would like to ask a question, just go ahead and unmute and talk with Dwayne.
Dwayne,
Yeah,
this is John Goss.
I see.
Yes. What I find interesting about this is that you have a guy he's a genius. He's hardworking. He lived a long time. His country treated him miserably for many, many years. Unspeakable things happened to him. But yet he rose to a position of greatness for his country. And that he was able to put all that behind him, all his misfortune behind him, and was able to rise to the occasion. Some people in his position would have ended up hating their country for what happened to him in his younger days. So it's something that you're able to give us insight into the inner workings of this man and what kept him going. The love of space, the love of engineering, the love of getting things done. I think your tactics and all that worked really well in this play, and I commend you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. From everything I've read, Korolev had no interest in politics.
Right.
He joined the Communist Party because that's what you had to do to survive in that system. But his interest was the moon.
Yeah.
And whatever it took to get there.
Some people in his spot would have hated his country, and he didn't. And that's pretty unusual. So, evidently, he liked tea like you do.
And that is true. The menu there that was taken from what I read. That was his dinner every night. And he ran, for someone working in a communist country, he ran his operation in a very capitalist way, as the script says. Moscow didn't pay too much attention to his budget, so he paid some workers more if they performed better, which did not fit with the communist system, but he felt it got results.
Well, people don't ask questions if everything goes well. Things turn south. That's when they start asking questions.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions, Brian?
Well, you and I have talked about this before. I've read this script a few times, so I found it fascinating, especially considering we dealt a little bit on the other side of this, talking about the Apollo missions during Farnsworth. And we talked about the Apollo mission, so this is kind of a nice reflection on what the Soviets are doing at the same time. And a lot of people today don't realize how really intense and how serious both countries were about beating the other in the space race. That was a big deal, and a lot of people that were alive today don't realize the fear that Sputnik drove. I'm sure Dwayne remembers that, just how in his research what Sputnik did and what a shock it was to the American public, and that kind of helped drive John F. Kennedy too. That kind of got in his craw, which is one of the reasons. Now, believe it or not, John F. Kennedy wasn't a big proponent of the space program, but it was a real good way to stick it to the Soviets. So, but it was interesting. But they had a real good article about it in the Smithsonian a couple of months ago. But I just find the script fascinating. I find the character fascinating, and I would like to have seen what the Soviets would have done if he would have survived. And because after that they really didn't have a lot of success with trying to get to the moon. Even their probes kind of crashed and everything. So it would have been interesting to see what they would have done.
I don't have as much of a question. Can I go next?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I don't have as much of a question, but an observation, because I found this whole story fascinating. Because part of this story came in, I don't know if you all the movie Hidden Figures, about the 3 African American that worked in Langley that nobody knew about, that were behind the scenes, that were trying to push for this same to get into the orbit. This part of the story, which is so beautiful, tells the back end of that story with Hidden Figures. If you ever watch that movie, this is so fascinating when the Americans realized that they were not first, and everyone, and it took the wind out of everybody's sail, and they were so upset. This really brings that story of Hidden Figures together. It is so interesting, and I just thought it was so well done and so fascinating. And it's almost, if you were a student, you would watch both those and see how these things historically collided. It's interesting. It was very good. It's very good.
Thank you. I love that movie. I've seen it several times.
Right. And do you remember that? And when they all were sitting and they were looking in the video, this is the true story, or the other story, as as a part of our story. And I remember that so well. So you did a great job. It was great. Absolutely great.
Thank you.
Absolutely great.
Do we have any more questions?
I have one more. This is Nina Thacker again. I know you were recording this. Is there going to be a way to get a copy of that recording?
We are looking at putting a copy of the recording on YouTube. Keep an eye on the Little Theater Norfolk webpage and Facebook page, and we'll try to get that information out as soon as we can get it up.
My son's very big in physics and the space program. When he was little, he loved it, and he couldn't do this tonight. So I was thinking of a recording, getting him to be able to watch it. So, because it was fascinating, thoroughly enjoyed it.
I'm glad. Shows you how well written it was.
Oh, it was well written and well acted.
Thank you. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Not a question, but I thought it was awesome. My son is very into history. Unfortunately, I had to drop him off by his father's house, but he was really into it, and I knew he'd like it. That's why I, got into it. But I appreciate it. I wish he was here for the conversation because he would have loved it.
Yep.
I'll tell you something. I'm kind of sorry my father-in-law never got a chance to see this or read this play, because he worked for Aerojet for 30 years on the Titan II program. He would have been fascinated by this. Yeah, my father-in-law was an actual rocket scientist.
Wow.
So I would like to have read this. He would have gotten a kick out of it.
Right. How many reads did you do before you? How many dry runs did you have with this play before you actually presented it tonight?
I have performed the play in 3 different locations before this.
Okay.
The first time was at 40th Street Stage in what was it, 2009?
2009.
Yep.
Mhm.
And that same year, I also did it up in Roanoke, and then a couple of years later, I did it over at the venue on 35th here in Norfolk. And I spent the last 3 days going over the lines and over the lines and over the lines and over the lines, because I'm an actor and I have to do that because I have to go over the lines and
Right,
over the lines.
Right. Right. No. It's so well polished. I said you had to have gone to sleep with it a couple of weeks, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
I should probably tell the rest of the story that the original script that Bill started with in 2009 was twice as long. Basically, what you saw tonight was Act 1. There's a whole Act 2. They dealt with the first man in space, the first woman in space, first multi-crew spacecraft, all of that. And at some point in the rehearsal for 2009, it was determined that that was just way too much. And could I cut it down? So yes, I cut it down. And Bill is probably very grateful, and the audience probably ought to be grateful for that too.
Oh, yeah, because an audience has a difficult time putting up with one person for that long.
I think we could have rolled with it a little longer, but this was excellent. Yeah, I think we could have rolled with it. Yeah, it was good.
Well, I've seen you crush a 2-hour one-man show.
No, I got away with that. Yeah,
You crushed it.
I kept.
What you didn't see, and of course, a lot. Nina asked how much of this is true. It's all true. Of course, there are things left out. And it was hinted in this script that, Khrushchev just cared about the politics and the propaganda value. So Korolev wanted a very methodical space program like NASA did, where you try something, you test it, and then you move on to the next thing. Khrushchev, he just wanted first. So, after the first man in space, he didn't care about the second man in space. He wanted, the first woman in space. He wanted a 2-man crew. When they got to the 3-man crew, I think that was Voskhod. I'm not good with my Russian. They didn't have a 3-person spacecraft, but Khrushchev wanted 3 people launched in space. So they had to take a 2-person spacecraft and take out some of the life support systems to make room for the 3rd crew member. Of course, they couldn't stay up very long with, without, the stuff they took out. And it was very dangerous, but, Khrushchev wasn't, they didn't have OSHA in those days.
This is true.
And it just drove Korolev nuts. But I think it was in the movie The Right Stuff, the line, no Bucks, no Buck Rogers, and the other way around, no Buck Rogers, no Bucks, Korolev couldn't get his rubles unless he was doing one stunt after another to keep Khrushchev happy.
Yep.
If he did that, then he would get money to do, what he felt was necessary for a methodical approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, money was hard to come by for the Russian space program.
So how did that story end when they had the 3 up there, but there really wasn't enough to hold the 3?
I mean, they all survived. They just couldn't stay up very long. But it was not the kind of thing you wanted to do.
Right. Yeah. That's another show, though. I tell you.
And my understanding is, the Soviets operated a lot closer to the edge safety-wise than the U.S. did. We were much more concerned about safety than the Soviet Union was.
Right.
Yeah. They also kept their failures very close to the vest. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, even to this day, a lot of their failures are just kind of under the table. It's come to light in recent years, but they lost some people in reentries and things that they just didn't talk about.
Dwayne,
yeah,
this is for Dwayne. I was wondering if you worked on trying to mimic the Russian speech patterns versus English speech patterns. You know, you write a play, you're going to throw in some idioms and some just local phrasing that doesn't work well if a real Russian was saying it. So did you try to learn how the Russians would actually say something, as how they would word something in a sentence, as opposed to how an English speaker would do so?
I did not. I did not.
Because that sounded pretty convincing, the way he was talking. Obviously, he tried to have the Russian accent, but his word phrase seemed convincing to me.
Let me tell you a little story behind this. When I was at 40th Street Stage back in the later 2000s, I had become the script reader. We were always taking submissions of new scripts.
Mm-hmm.
By the second page of starting to read Dwayne's script, I was reading it with a Russian accent.
Da.
And I thanked Frankie Little Harden, was the operator of 40th Street Stage, and I thank her so much for everything she allowed me to do. Of course, I had to go up to her with that play, and I said, you know, we really need to do this. We have to do this, and I have to be Korolev. And the rest, as they say, is history. All right, ladies and gentlemen, are there any more questions for the evening?
Well, I thank you all. I see people from Roanoke. I see one person from Minnesota.
Awesome.
Thanks,
I don't know
Bill.
if Chris wants
You're
me
welcome.
to out him or not, but Chris Nolet there joining in from Minnesota. He performed this role in Duluth.
Oh,
Cool.
Cool.
well, I'm going to say goodnight and say thank you very much for performing and for writing this play.
Yes, thank you. And it was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You
Thank
all
you.
have a wonderful evening.
And good
You
night.
too.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Dwayne.
Thanks.
Thank
thanks.
Alrighty.
you.
Bye.
Ed. Thank you. It was great.
All righty. Bye-bye.